Hey, my name is Mike O'Brien. I'm a Seattle City Council member. I represent District 6 in Seattle, which is Northwest Neighborhoods. We're here this morning in Greenwood at a neighbor's backyard cottage. And I want to talk to folks a little bit about accessory dwelling units, what we're thinking about as far as legislation, because I hear from folks all the time, especially in this housing crisis, that we need more housing opportunities, especially in single-family neighborhoods. So in Seattle, we've been able to build basement units since 1994, and in 2006 we made it legal to build backyard cottages pretty much anywhere in the single-family zones in the city. And yet when we look at what's happened over the last few decades, only a handful of units are getting built in any given year. So we reached out to a bunch of folks in our community with the goal of trying to figure out three things. One is, how can we get more of these units in single-family neighborhoods built? Two, how do we make sure that low-income homeowners also have the tools necessary to them to build a backyard cottage? And three, to make sure low-income renters have access to these types of units in really desirable single-family neighborhoods. A little over 2 years ago, as we started to work on that legislation, we got challenged by the Queen Anne Community Council. They basically didn't challenge the legislation, but they challenged the environmental review of that process. And the hearing examiner, which is like a city judge, told us that we needed to do a full environmental impact statement. So we started the environmental impact statement. That process was wrapped up about 2 months ago. It took a little over 2 years. Unfortunately, the same folks that challenged us 2 years ago challenged again, arguing that the environmental impact statement wasn't adequate enough. So we have a few more months of process to work through. Once that's settled, we'll be ready to move forward with legislation. So when I introduce the legislation, this preferred alternative from the EIS, a lot of the pieces of that will be familiar for folks that have been tracking it for a few years. That includes policy changes that would allow folks to build both a backyard cottage and a basement unit as opposed to just one, as current law allows. It would eliminate the off-street parking requirement if you were to build one of these units. It would allow the unit to be slightly bigger, maybe 1,000 square feet instead of 800, and maybe a little bit taller, a foot or two taller based on the lot size. There are also some changes that are new that came out of the environmental impact statement, and I want to talk about those a little bit too. One of those changes is around square footage requirements on single family lots in general, and saying if you're going to build a single family home with just one unit, we want to limit the size of that, to limit McMansions, and try to encourage people instead to reuse the existing house and build a backyard cottage where they can add an extra unit, and we think it fits in better with the neighborhood. Another change is about the owner occupancy requirement. Currently the law says only owners who live on site can do a backyard cottage or a basement unit. And that's been a barrier to folks. So that's another area we're looking at changing around owner occupancy. Now, some folks in neighborhoods have been concerned about the speculative nature that might create by eliminating that. But what the EIS found was that shouldn't really be a concern based on the current economics. We do want to address that a bit, and so what we're proposing is that if you want to build both a backyard cottage and a basement unit, you have to have owned the property for at least a year. And we'll talk more about that, and if you want more details about that, you can find it on our website. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are three policy goals we're trying to achieve here. One was to create more housing opportunities in our single-family neighborhoods. The second was to make sure that low-income homeowners also have opportunities to create an additional unit, whether it's a basement unit or a backyard cottage. And the third was to make sure that low-income renters have access to this new housing we're talking about. Now, most of the land use policies I've talked about so far would largely affect the first policy goal of just simply creating more units. But what we found in the Racial Equity Toolkit process was there are other things that we can do to help make sure that low-income homeowners and renters also have access to this. So in the budget that just passed, the City Council created a pilot program within the Office of Housing to work with homeowners to make sure they have some funding available to help put perhaps a basement unit in their existing house so they can access some of this new opportunity. We also expanded outreach dollars within Office of Housing to make sure that homeowners are aware of all the programs that we're doing to help keep them stabilized in their housing. I've shared a lot of information with you today, and there's a lot more information available on our website if you want to learn more about the specifics around the preferred alternative that was mentioned in the environmental impact statement, and also to learn more about the racial equity toolkit we did to make sure that the policies we're setting can affect everyone in a positive way. 2019 is going to be a big year on accessory dwelling units, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for you and your neighbors to be engaged and help influence the council's legislative process. So I look forward to hearing from you all in 2019. Thanks.